Hi, welcome to Portrait 1, and we are going to begin by just creating a background with our local color. And I am using my fluid paper, and I'm trying to show you that in order to remove your paper, you have to use this, your palette knife to kind of separate it. So why don't I just, that is what I'm doing right now. So I use my palette knife, and this is how it kind of just gets removed after you gesso it, of course, and it has dried properly. Now I'm taking my white tape, and this is an art tape that will keep your work from, keep your paper from ripping if you've gessoed your paper first. And I would probably measure, instead of just like free eyeing how you're putting your tape on, it would probably be better to say, okay, half inch, and then put your tape in the right area. Because later on when you pull that off, like I started to notice that my, like just doing it by eye was not accurate at all. Okay, so next what I am doing is mixing up my grayscale, and I'm referring back to my Canva to see where on that spectrum the gray is and how dark and how light it needs to be. So I'm adding just a little bit more black, and I think this is kind of smart actually. I'm not quite sure. Oh, there's my cadmium orange. I wasn't quite sure how dark I wanted it to be, so I created two separate layers and making two separate mixes in case one works better than the other. Okay, now I am adding my matte medium, and you just want to have enough where you kind of feel like it's a 1-to-1 ratio. You want it to be slightly transparent, and I'm using about, that is a flat brush, but it looks about like a either 3/4 inch or a 1/2 inch brush. You want your brush to be big enough to be able to fill the space quickly because it does dry quickly, your acrylic paint does. But you don't want it too big where you don't have control over where your paint is going either. The matte medium does kind of like, I don't know if you can see it properly. I know that I'm having a hard time seeing it because of the reflections, but it kind of like, if you don't, it gives you a little bit of a gap. So what I did was I ended up letting it dry, and I didn't show this part, but I ended up doing a second layer to make sure that it's nice and even on the background. Okay, so next up we have, well, I'm just showing you that we have our printed reference photo in black and white, and I am going to make sure it fits and cut it out. So after this first portrait, just to give you a heads up, I ended up shrinking down all of my reference photos to 7.5 by 7.5 inches because I didn't want a lot of it to be cut off by the tape. So, but I think in this first one, this is an 8 by 8 inch. I'm not quite sure. Okay, but anyhow, I'm trying to figure out where the portrait is going to go so nothing gets cut off too much. The graphite transfer paper just rolls out kind of like parchment paper. One side has graphite on it and the other side does not. And even though you can tell really well that that side has the graphite on it, when you're there in person, they look very similar. So it's best to kind of do a scratch test. And what that means is like lay it down where you think it's graphite side down and just scratch on top to make sure that it is coming through. Because I did make a mistake once where I did my entire transfer upside down and nothing came onto the canvas. That was not fun. All right, so I just did my scratch test and I'm making sure that it's covering beyond the tape. And I actually, this is a little bit of a trick. I could have used my white art tape again, but I actually switched to a regular old painter's tape for my transfer. And the reason why is if you start to do more than one transfer, sometimes when you're like in a rush or you're just like, I need to get, you're like not thinking, you're going to rip up the wrong tape, and that could cause some problems, especially if your paint is like, if you need it in a specific spot. So by kind of keeping everything separate, different colored tapes, different colored pens for different layering, like, I don't know, just if you can come up with a process that works for you, that would be great. Of course, you can absolutely use just white tape, your art tape, for taping down your transfer. But I think this is just kind of like a clever tip that really has helped me and saved me in like a lot of times. Okay, I'm also using painter's tape to tape down my reference photo. And when you saw me doing like that finger thing, all I was doing, red pen, I love this pen for my transfers, by the way. It has such a fine point. I will make sure to put this one on the materials list. A regular red ballpoint pen works as well. But anyhow, we're talking about the tape, transfer paper, blue tape, you know, just make sure it's taped to the table as well, so it's not moving around in case your transfer accidentally unsticks. And so yeah, I'm starting off with the eye. Usually I just start, like, it doesn't matter where you begin your transfer. You can start underneath, but what you're going to do is kind of outline any information that you are going to need for the painting. And at the moment, I am making sure that I'm getting the highlights, the midtones, and the shadows in. And if you see those lines, those hatch mark lines that I'm doing right now, the lines that are right next to each other called hatch marks, I kind of use that sometimes to let me know that there's a shadow there. The wider I make my hatch marks means there's less shadow, more light. And the closer together the hatch marks are means that the shadow is kind of dark. By doing hatch marks, it allows me to not get confused at what is a contour line and what is a shadow. Although I don't always stick to that. In this one I am doing hatch marks, and I know that I do it in a few more in my series of portraits, but it's not an absolute. Sometimes it's just one day I feel like it and the other day I don't. Okay, so here's something to note, that I'm adding the hatch marks in on the shadow where the lip curves up. I know at the moment it kind of looks like a mustache, but the only person who really needs to know this information is me. So if you are coming up with a way to give you some tips and tricks for when it's time to start painting and say, hey, you might want to pay attention to this later, you do your own thing. Like, if you don't do hatch marks, it's fine. Maybe you do something else. Those are things that you will just kind of start to do on your own, and whatever works for you works for you. It doesn't have to work for anyone else. Okay, so the transfer is the first part of the painting process where you're getting to know your subject very well. And there's no shame in a transfer. And I know I've said this before, but in fact, there is actually, I'm not sure if it's scientifically proven, but I feel like it is. But the act of going over with your lines and mapping out your subject's face is going to help you immensely when it comes time to painting your portrait, because this is the first thing that you're doing where you're getting to know where the shadows are going to go, where the highlights are going to go, little intricacies of the face. And of course, if you did your own drawing, that is fine as well. But when it comes to doing realistic portraits, most of the time you do realistic portraits for a customer and they give you a photo to work off of, and I would say, unless they really love your distinct style, most of the time people are paying for likeness with the photo that they're giving you. So it's kind of essential to use a transfer in order to make sure that you are going to satisfy your customer. And I know that is tough to hear sometimes, but a lot of us have to make money by doing this. And one of the things that makes your customer happy is making sure that you get the likeness. Even a book I just read from the 1800s talked about hiring an artist, and they did a terrible job with the likeness and how unhappy they were. And I thought that was kind of funny and interesting. That I was like doing a portrait class at the same time of listening to that. But anyhow, if you are someone who has a very distinct drawing style, you might not need to do this because you are somebody that is being hired for your style. If you are someone who doesn't have a style yet, then doing this is kind of important because when you start to learn by doing, eventually you do it enough. Okay, real fast before I finish that thought, I'm just spraying it with a fixative. And the fixative will keep your drawing from budging. But anyhow, when you do your drawings enough, when you do your paintings enough times, eventually you're going to get to a point where it becomes second nature, kind of like riding a bike or driving your car. And you don't really think so much about the actual process of doing. When you get to that point, it's going to be far easier to break the rules and create your own style because you know which rules to break. But when you're first starting off, you kind of need to imitate, or you kind of need to learn about how things are. You just need practice. So imitation is the way that we learn. And eventually, if you do it enough, then it's going to be easy for you to say, you know what would happen if I did this differently? Or what would happen if I changed the lighting here, or I changed the style here, or I made the eyes bigger, or whatever. And so that is when it becomes easier to make your style, although some people just have their style. And I think one thing to keep in mind throughout this course is this is one way of doing it, but there really is no right way to do something. But doing it this way that I'm showing you has given me a lot of, it's kind of helped me avoid a lot of mistakes, or it kind of gets me to an end result where I'm not stopping halfway through because I'm frustrated with the process. For me, in order to finish your piece, it's like one of the most important things. And so many times as artists, we get so frustrated throughout the process that we end up giving up. So by you watching this class and seeing an actual process of how I begin, what the next step is, and then how I finish, it might give you an idea of how you would go about your process as well, even if it's not using the same materials I use or the same techniques. How can you get to the end result is the most important thing. And how can you get there where you actually enjoy the process rather than kind of fearing everything and kind of being frustrated by it, where it just leads to you stopping. Okay, so I've talked a little bit too long, and we'll move on to the next portrait. All right, or I'm sorry, the next video. I will see you there.